Hey guys, so in this video we're going to review linear functions and the basics of lines. So this is actually a two-part series. So we're just talking about some aspects of lines, and then in another video I'll talk about equations of lines. This is really intended for like pre-calc, trig, or calc students who maybe forgot some of the basics. So linear functions, what makes a linear function is, okay, so I've got f of x and it's in this form, ax plus b. If the function can be written like this, it's a linear function. And a and b, those stand for whatever real numbers that you want, so really plug in whatever. Now, linear functions can have a couple other forms. So remember, f of x and y tend to be interchangeable. So you could have something that looks like this, and then it could be rewritten as a linear function. And what I wanted to point out is, so as you move up in math, we kind of like start to change the letters on you because it doesn't really like matter what the letters are. So I write ax plus b, but you might remember back to algebra using mx plus b, where m was the slope. So m is still the slope. It's just that sometimes like we just change the context of how we're thinking about it. And so if you're moving on into some of those higher levels of math, like you have to kind of take a second to make these connections of like, doesn't this look like mx plus b? It literally is. And sometimes we, like I said, we just change the letters just because like we're thinking about like a higher concept, I guess, in some ways. And so, you know, whatever is attached to the x is the slope, and then that b part is the y-intercept. All right, so let's just talk about then, for most lines, what's the domain and range. So I have just a random line here, 4x plus 1. So we want to find the domain and range and then show how to graph it. So I actually want to start with graphing it. So let me just draw a little sketch here. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so I've got my little sketch. Okay, so the y-intercept is 1. So what that means is I come to the y-axis and I plot a point at 1 on the y-axis, and then the slope is 4, which means that I count up 4 and then I go to the right 1. So I'm going to go up 1, 2, 3, 4 and over 1, which would bring me to this point here. And so there's my line. And I talked about in another video how to find the domain and range, so I'll drop a link to that in the description. Domain and range is just a concept that comes up with all functions. So what we're really concerned about with domain is how far to the left and how far to the right does this line go. And it really just goes in both directions for forever, right? It goes to the left and right for forever. It goes up and down for forever. So anytime you have a slanted line like this is actually true of all slanted lines. The domain and range is actually always the same. The domain is all real numbers, which we write as negative infinity to infinity in interval notation, and the range is the same thing. So all lines have this domain and range as long as they are slanted, which brings me to then the different cases. So what about if I have something like f of x equals 5? What's the domain and range in that case? And also we should graph it. So I personally think it's always easier to first graph something if you can do that easily, which in this case we can, because then it makes just figuring out what that domain and range is so much easier. So f of x equals 5. Now if you get a little thrown off by that, just remember that could also be considered y equals 5. I think thinking of this in terms of y equals 5 is very helpful. So let me show you why. Sometimes people like panic a little with this type of function, with how to graph it, like, oh, I know it's horizontal or vertical, but I can't remember which direction. So what this is telling you, right, is that the y value is always 5. It's actually like if you think about it in that context, I think it simplifies the idea, because okay, so if I come up here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, no matter what x value I have, 5 has to be my y value. So I could have the point 0, 5, 1, 5, 2, 5. The y value has to be the same, right? So it's just a simplified way of how to graph that. And now I can come up with my domain and range. Okay, so for my domain, so remember, domain has to do with x values. So we're just thinking about how far to the left and to the right is this thing going. And you can see, right, this line is just going to the left and right for forever. So the domain is all real numbers, which we already discussed. You write like this. But the range, in this case, the range is what are the y values allowed to be. It literally spells it out for you, right, in the equation. So how do I represent y equals 5 then? It's not interval notation. So actually what we use then for the range in this case is known as set notation. This is it with the little curly brackets. Actually, this first curly bracket kind of wasn't my finest. Okay, there we go. There you go. There's the range. That's it. It's just 5, right? No matter what, y is 5. So that's what we want to write down. All right, so now let's take a look at the other type of line, x equals -4. So again, finding the domain and range. So again, this is just telling you what your x value has to be, right? And let's see if I can draw this a little straighter. Sorry. Having some issues with my digital pen today. My pen tip kind of broke, so some of my lines are not as straight. I've got a new pen coming though. Okay, so I've got x equals -4, which means that no matter what value of y I choose, x just has to be -4. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, -4. So I would have the points like -4, 0, -4, 1, -4, -1. So no matter what, my x value has to be -4. And okay, I'm having some difficulty here. Let me see if I can draw this. There we go. So there is the graph, and now that can just make the domain and range much simpler. Now I think you should try to write down the domain and range before I tell you what it is, just to check that you're understanding this, and then hit play when you're ready. So the domain in this case, now the x's are just always -4, right? So I'm gonna just write my little set notation here. And now in this case, the range just goes up and down for forever. The y's just go up and down for forever. So the range is -infinity to +infinity. All right, cool. So there is another form of a line that you might recall, the standard form of a line. And that looks like this: ax plus by equals c, where a, b, and c are numbers. LOL, what? Okay, so the word numbers, believe it or not, is like, if you start paying attention to like how mathematical things are described, we don't usually just use the general term numbers. We usually use like the term like real numbers, rational numbers, integers, whole numbers. So in math, numbers is considered to be just too general of a word. Like we want to be slightly more specific about the type of numbers. So I wrote just numbers here because I have some weird trivia for you. The next time that you're trying to be super interested at a party, this is what you can tell people. All right, so here's the deal. The weird thing about standard form is that math books actually do not agree on what types of numbers A, B, and C should be. Isn't that weird? Like, it's called the standard form. Wouldn't you think that we have a standard for this? But no, we don't. So I just mentioned this because if you're not in my class, like your book could, you know, do whatever. Now, I have a preference, right, because I'm a math person, so I like integers. I don't like having rationals, but I'll just defer to whatever the book says. I believe the book, if you're in my pre-calc class and watching this, I believe our book says that you can use rational numbers. I'm not really too strict on, like, as long as it's in standard form, so as long as it's in this ax plus by, so x and y on the same side and then this other number on the other side, that to me is, like, really good enough for our pre-calc class. All right, so this is in standard form, 3x minus y equals 6. So what's the domain and range? And also we want to graph it. So there's a couple different ways that you can graph this. I will just tell you, let's do it like this. So let's talk about a couple ways you could graph it. And again, I'm just trying to draw straight lines here. Okay, so like, what are the different ways that you can graph this? You could solve for y, which I actually think is probably the easiest way to actually graph this. But I want to this is a review video, so I want to review other ways you can graph this first. So one way that you can graph this is you can use intercepts. So what you can do is you can plug in 0 for x and then solve for y. And if you do that, so then you have -y equals 6, so y equals -6. So one point that you're going to have here is 0, -6. Let's see, do I have 1, 0, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? So I can plot that point here. And then let me clear this out. And then I can plug in 0 for y. And then I can just solve for x. So I get this other point 2, 0. So this is one way, and then to see how I plotted over here. So this is one way that you can graph this. Now, like I said, another way you could graph this, which is totally fine. Let's see. Oh, I always hate drawing on camera. Sometimes it's really stressful. All right. Let's see. Boom. Okay, there. Much better. All right. So there's your line. So if you had solved for y and then graphed, that also works. Now, here's the one thing I do want to tell you. So don't think to yourself, oh, well, I'll always just solve for y, because that's just what's easier. Like when you're moving up in math, you have to be able to think about approaching a problem from a couple different directions. So even if you don't like having to graph this way, it's important for you to know how to graph this way, because it just makes you a stronger student. So you're not going to be as strong of a student if you say, I can only ever do this way. That type of mentality will not serve you really anywhere. Like if there's multiple ways to do something, it's just it's much stronger in general. This isn't even a math thing. It's just stronger to know other ways to do it. Okay, so anyways, so now let me clear some space. Okay, so what's the domain and range? Well, this is a slanted line, so the domain is all real numbers and the range is also all real numbers. Ta-da! Okay. So, a couple other things I want to talk about with lines. How do you find a slope? Okay, well, this could be easy, because if your equation is in this y equals mx plus b form, then the slope would just be m. But if you don't have that, let's say that you have just 2 points, then you're going to have the slope formula. So that's y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So very important formula. And 2 things that I want to mention regarding the slope formula. The slope of a vertical line, so what will happen is that you get a number over 0. This results, so the slope of a vertical line is undefined. And then the slope of a horizontal line, you get 0 over a number, and that just becomes 0. So 0 in the denominator is a problem. 0 on the top is okay. So just the thing to remember. So I want to, of course, review some of this. So let's find the slope between a few points. Now, personally, like I said, this is a review video, so I would hope that, like after seeing the formula, you can do this. So I'll show you the formula one more time in case you want to write it down and pause the video. But if you're watching this for review, this is something, if you're like in a pre-calc or above class, this is something that, you got the formula, I think you can do it. So I would say try these 3 and then hit play when you're ready, because I'm just going to blast through the examples. Okay, so let's see. For my first slope, let's see, I want to give myself room, so let's put it over here. M equals, so it doesn't matter, by the way, which one is your x1, y1, your x2, y2. You'll get the same answer either way. So I will choose, this is my first point, and this is my second point. So I've got 2 minus 6 over -3 minus 5. So this becomes -4 over -8, and so this will equal 1/2. So that would be my first slope. And if you went the other way, then you should have still gotten 1/2. So it doesn't matter which order you put the points in. But just notice that the 2 and the -3, those stayed in line together, and then the 5 and the 6 stayed in line together. So that's what's really important. Okay, so let's move on to B here. So I've got 7 minus 7 over -4 minus 2. And this result gives me 0 over -6. So the second that you have this result, this just equals 0. That's all that really matters, right? And then for this last one, so let's see, I'll just kind of cram it in under here. So this becomes -1 minus 2 over 6 minus 6. So this gives me -3 over 0. So you have a number over 0, and so that's undefined, my friends. Okay, let's just do this one more way. So find the slopes of the following lines. So just to kind of remind you of how to go about that. So I have a bunch of equations in standard form. I think you should pause the video, solve for y, just make sure you're good on that, and hit play when you're ready. Remember, math is not a spectator sport. Okay, so to figure out what the slopes are, what I'm going to do is I'm going to solve for y in each of these. So first I'm going to subtract the 4x over to the other side. So this becomes -2y equals -4x plus 8, and then I can divide each part of this problem by -2. Now I like writing out all those -2's so I can like kind of process in my brain the calculation. So this becomes y equals 2x minus 4, and so my slope in this case will be equal to 2. And then for this other equation, so now in this case, now I want to add the 5x to the other side. So this becomes 3y equals, I'm going to call this 5x minus 15, and then I'll divide everything by 3 to get y equals 5/3 x minus 5, and in this case my slope I can see now will be 5/3, and so that's it. Okay, and so that brings us to the end of the first part of this review of lines. So just some basic info about them. I have another video where I'll remind you how to write equations of lines. That can be a little tricky, so that's worthy of its own video. So if you found this helpful, please consider liking, commenting, subscribing to the channel. All that stuff really helps me out, and I super appreciate it. Otherwise, I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.